Welcome to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. We're getting much closer to the CPAC Orlando event, the national conservative, I'm not even going to say conservative anymore. It is an American movement of people who love freedom and who love this country and understand what's at stake. So remember to get your tickets at conservative.org. But I want to bring in our guest, ACU board member Gordon Chang, who joins us with more on how these rogue nations are feeling empowered by Biden's incompetency. And later on, we're going to be joined by Representative Chip Roy of Texas, who will be talking about this push to shut the government down over vaccine mandates and also talk about the crisis at the border. But first, Gordon Chang is joining me tonight on CPAC Now. Thank you, Gordon, so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Mercy.
So, before we even started the show, Gordon, I looked at you and I said, there is just so much going on across the globe. I don't even know where to start. But I do want to start with a tweet I put out just yesterday it said, it was a picture of Biden, basically eating his ice cream. And then at the top, I said, international threats, inflation, and ice cream, the three I's. I mean, seriously, Gordon, you're watching these crises unfold across the globe, starting with what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. What's your thought? What are you thinking?
It's no coincidence that the world is deteriorating before our eyes. And it's not just Ukraine. It's not just Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, India, Belarus, you name it. The problem is that the bad guys, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, Algeria, they all see a moment of weakness on the part of Biden, and they're trying to exploit it. So this is the reason why at certain points in history, things just fall apart. And the opposite's also true, Mercy, in that when America shows leadership, when we're strong and when we're resolute, peace breaks out everywhere all at once. But unfortunately, we're on the other side of that slope.
Let's start with Russia first. We know Putin is taking very aggressive actions to add troops to the border, right, on the Ukrainian border. Basically has told the embassy officials to exit Ukraine. It sounds more and more like they're moving towards into invading Ukraine. We're seeing the Biden administration, they're basically saying we're going to move forward with potential export controls if Russia takes action against Ukraine. Is that going to be enough in terms of trying to contain Putin from taking further actions?
At the moment, deterrence is breaking down. So the answer is no, it's not enough. There's a philosophy in the Biden administration that if Russia invades Ukraine, if there's an incursion, then they will impose costs. Really, what we should reverse the process. We should be imposing the costs now and telling Putin that if he doesn't invade, then we'll consider lifting them. But right now, we obviously are not stopping the Russian buildup. There's about 127,000 Russian troops on the Ukraine border. We know that Russia is moving troops from its far regions over to Ukraine. It's sailing ships close to Ukraine. So really right now, this is an unprecedented buildup of military assets. Putin is going to the Beijing Olympics. Opening ceremony is February 4th. And a lot of people say, well, he won't invade during the event. And maybe yes, maybe no. But if we go back to 2008, Putin did go to the Beijing Summer Olympics then. He showed up at the opening ceremony, and then he left and then started breaking apart Georgia. So we can't be sure that he's not going to do anything during the Olympics, which, by the way, end February 20th.
Well, that's a good point. I also think we're starting to hear from the Russian top diplomat promising that they would take appropriate measures if the West responds to Moscow's security demands and if they find that there's not constructive conversations there. So not only are they threatening Ukraine, but it sounds like they're threatening the United States and the NATO allies.
Yes, Russia's come up with a list of completely unreasonable demands that Putin knows that the West cannot meet. Biden, to his credit, is standing firm on those. But the issue, though, really is what are we going to do to impose those costs? Now, we can cripple the Russian economy. Putin knows that. But I guess he also believes that Biden doesn't want to do it. He also knows that Germany is not on board with the rest of NATO. So he sees a divided Western coalition, and therefore he's moving. If there were strong American leadership, we could bring Berlin in line. We could make sure that NATO is united. But unfortunately, right now, even our own friends aren't sure of what we're going to do. And so this is a fundamental failure of deterrence.
Let me ask you, President Biden has talked about maybe moving troops to Eastern Europe, being prepared in case Russia does attack. I mean, could the United States end up in war?
We could end up in war. We could end up in war not only in Ukraine, but also in a number of other hotspots right now. But we do need to bring reinforcements to our NATO allies. We need to reassure them because Russia is not going to stop at Ukraine. He didn't stop at Georgia. He didn't stop at Crimea. He hasn't stopped at the Donbass, eastern part of Ukraine. He's not going to stop even if he takes all of Ukraine and annexes it as part of Russia. So this is a point where we've got to stop him. I know a lot of people say this is exceedingly dangerous. And yes, it is, no matter what we do. But because of a failure of American policy, we have allowed the situation to deteriorate to a point where nothing we do is safe. So we have to, at some point, decide that we've got to stop it. This is the same dynamic in Europe in the 1930s. Russia and France didn't stop the remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936. They did nothing when the Third Reich absorbed Austria. They then had the Munich Agreement. And then when Hitler violated the Munich Agreement, then they didn't do anything either.
Right.
And so eventually it got to a point where Hitler went too far. He invaded Poland, and Britain and France had to respond. That's how we could get into war now. We are the Britain and France of the 21st century.
Let's go to a different topic here. We've seen North Korea. They're suddenly launching more missiles. There was a New York Times report on this where they too feel very empowered, this rogue nation, to show their muscles, to show their strength by continuing to launch. They did this 6 ballistic missiles since January 5th. You're talking about this is almost as many missiles in 1 month as North Korea launched in all of last year. What is happening in North Korea? Is this following the same bit of narrative that we're seeing happening in Russia?
There are a couple of things going on in North Korea right now. First of all, just to continue the conversation we started, Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, sees that Biden is not in a position to respond. So he needs to test missiles anyway. So, because his technicians need to validate their design. So he sees a moment of opportunity. But also right now, I think that Kim Jong-un is responding to serious conditions at home. People are starving to death. The economy is collapsing. And I think he realizes he needs a foreign enemy. So he's going after the United States. And also, one other thing, there are presidential elections in South Korea on March 9, and there's a lot at stake for Kim. It depends who wins. And so I think he's trying to influence the outcome of that ballot contest as well. So for Kim Jong-un, this is a moment of particular importance. And one other thing, Mercy, the North Koreans have tested hypersonic missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles. The North Koreans didn't develop that on their own. They got that from either China or Russia. But the Biden administration is not asking that critical question. Where did the North Koreans get this technology?
Then let me just shift over to China. Obviously, we're seeing these Olympics that look like they're moving ahead, despite the fact that the Biden administration said that they'll put a diplomatic boycott in place. What do you think? I mean, do you think we're going to see more boycotts, or just the U.S. athletes going to show up, do what they need to do in the Olympics, and kind of just allow business as usual?
There's going to be business as usual because only 5 or 6 countries have followed the United States in imposing a diplomatic boycott, which is symbolic. I mean, it's important, but it is merely symbolic. It looks like these games are going to go forward. The Biden administration did the bare minimum. It needed to do something, but it didn't really want to antagonize Beijing. So it did the minimum necessary. And that's why these games will go forward. They shouldn't go forward. First of all, China's committing genocide, crimes against humanity, atrocities that rival those of the Third Reich prior to the mass exterminations that began in 1941. But also, our athletes there aren't safe. China is undergoing a coronavirus epidemic, outbreaks that are uncontrolled, both of Delta and Omicron. Also in Beijing, the disease is there. So they should postpone the Olympics if for no other reason than disease. I mean, the International Olympic Committee postponed the Summer Olympics of 2020 and held them a year later. At a minimum, that's what they should be doing. Also, we know the athletes aren't going to be safe because of human rights concerns. So there's just so many reasons not to hold these games, but the Biden administration has decided not to do anything.
Okay, we also have seen that China, and this was several days ago, they sent several of these military aircrafts near Taiwan, showing like a force in this area as two of the U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups, they were finishing up their training exercises. Obviously for China, they're also sensing, we know the U.S. is weak, therefore we can show our military strength against them. Your thoughts?
Yeah, China sent its planes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, which is not sovereign airspace, but it's considered to be a hostile act if you don't notify the country that imposes the zone. And in one of those flights, there were 39 planes, which was quite a big showing. This has been continuing on for quite some time from last year. They're pressuring Taiwan. Taiwan is responding. We need to be doing a lot more to deter Beijing. It's good that we have our two carrier groups and that we were exercising with the Japanese in the Philippine Sea, as you referred to. But obviously we need to do more because, again, deterrence is breaking down.
Well, really a fascinating discussion, Gordon. You just really can break it down so easily for all of us. We look forward to seeing you at CPAC in Orlando, February 24th through the 27th. And of course, Lydia will be joining you, who we just love. And just want to thank you for all you do in ensuring that we do what we can to stop the Chinese communists. Thank you, Gordon Chang.
Thank you, Mercy. And see you in the free state of Florida.
Amen. I totally agree. And y'all stay with us. We'll be right back with Congressman Chip Roy.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Schlapp with CPAC, and it's my privilege to tell you that we've got a very important project that we've just announced, the First Amendment Fund. It's a brand new fund that we've created through our criminal justice reform efforts to raise money to take care of you, Americans who are being canceled and desecrated out there around the country. We know it just happened in Virginia, where parents were called domestic terrorists by the Biden administration, where people who just want to express their political views are canceled left and right. Now we have this terrible specter of a vaccine mandate where you can lose your job or be prevented from going to a restaurant or go to school according to your vaccination status. These are all the things that are happening in this country that are making people realize that America is in a fight to defend the principles that have made her great. If you want to be involved in this important effort, please go to conservative.org, click the link for the First Amendment Fund. Please donate to this C3 to help these victims across the country, including those who are just involved in politics, to make sure they have the legal representation they need to be able to live their great American life.
Welcome back to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. Joining me now is the great Congressman Chip Roy from the great state of Texas, who happens to have a 95% ACU rating. I got to say, Chip, you're almost perfect.
Well, make sure you tell my wife that. I'll give you her number here in just a second. Give her a holler. But Hey, it's great to be on with you as always. Thanks for everything you're doing out there, helping to get the conservative message out there. It's great to be in Texas. Obviously, I got to go back to D.C. next Monday, but it's always good to be home and I'll be meeting with some constituents here in about 10 minutes. There's a few here in this room. We're going to have a meeting, and I get fuel and get energy talking to them. So good to be home.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, what I've seen is so many Americans. I mean, we don't even call it conservative anymore. It's an American movement at this point to save this country. But let me jump right in. I've been following your Twitter feed. You've been doing so much to basically push back on these draconian control that we're seeing coming out of the federal government, coming out of Joe Biden. But before I get your reaction on the vaccine mandates, there is breaking news on Justice Stephen Breyer. There's word out that he's expected to retire from the Supreme Court by the end of this current term. Let me get your initial reaction to that.
Well, obviously, Justice Breyer is not someone that I can count on to defend the Constitution the way that I think it ought to be defended. Obviously, we're not going to look to Joe Biden to be giving us somebody who's going to be a faithful defender of the Constitution. And the one thing that I'll say to senators, we shouldn't be rubber stamping a nominee. We shouldn't be just accepting that whoever the president sends up is somebody that we ought to confirm. We need to have a full and robust vetting of whoever the president sends up, and we shouldn't confirm anybody or let anything proceed if the person doesn't actually honor and defend the Constitution. So we'll figure that out as it unfolds. I never really always count those rumors in D.C. until I see them, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I got to tell you, Chip, I worry because this is like God sent for the Democrats. They needed a boost, and you know that they get very riled up, and that liberal base gets riled up when it has to do with anything dealing with the Supreme Court justice. So we'll keep a close eye on that as the news continues to come out. I do want to move towards this letter that you put out with several Republicans considering shutting down the government over the vaccine mandate. We know that the federal funding is due to expire February 18th. Your plan, looking to get more support from Republicans, is basically let's pull the support from government funding legislation that includes language giving funds for vaccine mandates. What do you think? I mean, obviously Nancy Pelosi, who's running again, I don't know how that's possible. I mean, talking about one of the most unpopular Democrats. But, why is this so important to try to put pressure on stopping government funding when we're dealing with these really outrageous vaccine mandates?
Well, first of all, let's take it in order. The vaccine mandates are completely un-American. We should not be showing our papers to have mobility to get around our country. And that starts with our nation's capital, where I said last week on Fox that the D.C. is trying to make it harder to order a burger than to actually get carjacked. And that's actually what we're seeing, more than a carjacking a day. Yeah. And we're having restaurants getting shut down or getting harassed because if they had dare push back on all the vaccine mandate nonsense. Meanwhile, the CDC is finally acknowledging that natural immunity is actually better than vaccine immunity. We know that the vaccine does nothing to stop the spread of the virus. And now we're in the phase where we're dealing with the Omicron, which is now far less deadly. And we need to move on, open up our society, and move forward. We don't need any more of these draconian measures interfering with our rights given to us by God to move about freely. So I think that we as Republicans should stand up for a simple premise that we shouldn't be taking taxpayer dollars or borrowing money for our kids and grandkids to have to pay in order to fund the enforcement of these mandates. Republicans in Congress punt this stuff to the courts. We shouldn't do that. We're Article 1. We're Congress. We shouldn't fund the bureaucrats that are taking away our liberties. We shouldn't fund an FBI that's going after parents for daring to question school boards. We shouldn't fund a Department of Homeland Security that's failing to faithfully execute the laws and secure the border. And we sure as hell shouldn't fund bureaucrats going after Americans because they don't want to take a vaccine because they believe it's in their best interest not to, because maybe they have natural immunity or some issue that they believe is important for them. Right. Or they don't want to jab their child because they don't want to have a myocardial issue. So let's just stand up as Republicans and do our job. Don't fund bureaucracy to go after freedom. Stop funding tyranny.
And to your point, it really is Congress taking the lead on this because all of what you're seeing is lawsuit after lawsuit ending up in the courts. We saw one Texas judge basically stopping the vaccine mandates. We've seen the Supreme Court stopping President Biden's OSHA regulation of enforcing the vaccine mandate on employers, 100 employees or more. So we've seen it going in the right direction, but yet you see these cities, these liberal cities run by Democrats, still enforcing vaccine mandates, creating a huge headache for Americans who don't want to go to New York City, who don't want to come to Washington, D.C. When does this all end?
Well, I think it's going to burn out on its own sometime here in about March when people start seeing that Omicron is burning through our population. And I think God took care of this for us while our leaders are fumbling around and destroying freedom and making our children be masked and shutting down schools and shutting down the economy. The good Lord is kind of stepping in here and kind of saving ourselves from ourselves. But the thing that I think is really important here is when we're talking about funding this stuff, you just talked about the courts. We had a federal judge here, Jeff Brown here in Texas, that stepped in and did the right thing. But you saw the Supreme Court. They got it right on OSHA. But then Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh, they got it wrong. And so now CMS and our healthcare folks are now stuck with the mandates. Our men and women in uniform, our military are stuck with mandates. Federal contractors are stuck with mandates. And it's absurd. We need to end it and end it now. And no member of Congress, and I'm looking at you 19 Republican senators who in December voted for a CR, leaving these mandates in place, punting a responsibility to the court. I need all Republicans to stand up and say, look, let's not fund the bureaucrats going to go after the American people. Let's stand up for freedom. Let's do our Article 1 responsibility and the power of the purse to stand up for the people who sent us there to represent them.
That's right. And here, changing conversations here a little bit, you wrote a piece in FoxNews.com with Congressman Michael Cloud on impeaching Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alex Mayorkas. Tell us why, obviously, I think I know the answer, but I want you to share with us why this is so important, why we should move in this direction to impeach the DHS secretary.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the Texans that I represent and Texans throughout the state are getting sick and tired of having their state getting run over, their ranches getting overrun, fences getting cut, livestock getting out, having people harassed, having shots being fired at our law enforcement personnel, Border Patrol getting overrun, having opioids pouring into our schools, people dying, 100,000 Americans dying last year from fentanyl. And we're doing nothing about it. And in fact, worse, this administration is purposely ignoring the law. They are failing to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. They're abandoning their oath to the Constitution. And therefore, I believe that Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached. Now, I think we ought to be having a conversation about President Biden. But let's start right now, even while we're in the minority, and let's make the case for impeaching Mayorkas. I distributed a memo last fall. I outlined the short form of that in the Fox News op-ed with my colleague Michael Cloud, my fellow Texan. We're going to be introducing new articles of impeachment, I think makes the case about why when you fail to faithfully execute the laws, you purposely refuse to use migrant protection protocols that President Trump was using. You purposely fail to use Title 42. You let fence rust in fields and you pay contractors not to build the fence. You are actually abusing our asylum laws and you're empowering cartels instead of our law enforcement personnel and leaving Border Patrol sitting there getting overrun by cartels and Texans taking a brunt of it.
So
we should stop it.
Let me ask you, because we've seen some footage come out from Fox News where they've literally, these buses are releasing these single males. They're illegal immigrants coming to this country. Normally, the family units, they get by and they get through the process and then they end up in our communities. But now it's single males. Is this a new phenomenon, and why is nobody else covering this?
Well, first of all, credit to Bill Malugin, who I think was the one who was putting that story out there. He's been out there with Fox covering this on the border when others won't. But let me be clear. What we saw yesterday was unconscionable. You've got single males now being put on buses to be distributed throughout the United States, which, of course, most Americans would think is absolutely appalling. But I would add that, look, we had 1 million people either released or gotaways last year, about an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 gotaways and about 500,000 to 600,000 releases. Heavily family units, but remember, a lot of those family units are a patchwork quilt of people that claim to be family members, and they abuse that whole asylum process to be released. So think about it. 1 million people released into the United States last year. So Yes, this is egregious what's happening with the single adult males, but it's egregious when it's unaccompanied children and family units because the cartels use them to abuse them and put them into the sex trafficking trade. And they're still overrunning our border. And guess what? All those gotaways, it's because we're processing the family units.
Right.
It's all a fraud. It's an abuse of the asylum system, and we need to end it immediately. And that's why I think we should impeach Mayorkas.
Well, I got to tell you, we appreciate your leadership on all these issues. You're such a strong voice in Congress. We're looking very forward to sending Nancy Pelosi back home, where she will no longer be Speaker of the House, and Republicans win in 2022. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Hey, thanks, Mercedes. Thanks for your service and the Trump administration and what you guys are out there doing now. Keep the message going. God bless.
Thank you, Congressman Chip Roy. And thank you all for joining us tonight on CPAC Now, America Uncanceled.